Well, actually, the story is that there was an article in the California magazine called Top Guns with an S, and Jerry Bruckheimer was a producer at Paramount, Simpson Bruckheimer, and he had it optioned the article or bought the article through Paramount, and so it didn't read it had no characters, no story, no anything. It was just saying this is a place and this is who these guys are so flying, but it at least was something that Paramount could say, okay, I see this. So I was working on Dick Tracy at that time with Jeff Katzenberg, who was the head of production, and he wanted us to do a movie for them and pitched me a whole bunch of ideas. And one of them was Top Gun. And I got my private pilot's license at Michigan State. So the thought of flying in a Navy jet said, yeah, that sounds great. You know, it's really hard to get up in one of those. Trust me, it's really almost impossible. And the question was, always, what's the story? What's it about? Who's it about? And we had nothing, just nothing. We just had, so we had to figure out what this is. And I wanted to do research. So we also, by the way, went to the Pentagon, and before we did anything, because I said, look, if we can't get real jets, we can't real planes, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have little things on strings going by. It just won't work. And so we went to the Pentagon, met with, admirals and secretary of navies, maybe assistant secretary, and they agreed they would have to look at the script and approve it, but they would work with us. And that was like, okay, wow, we got real planes. So, but they said, but son, you'll have to fly in a Navy jet. And I said, oh, really? It's just, I didn't want to know how much I want to do it. As I couldn't wait. That was an immersive experience. And that was the idea, because I didn't know anything about that type of flying or that world at all. And so, and there was in Miramar, there was a Top Gun school. And I had a advisor, Pete Pettigrew, who was really very influential in the movie, and influential because of just how good he was and how smart. He was a MiG killer and in Vietnam, but he also a Top Gun instructor, and then so Pete helped set up interviews. I interviewed like 30 pilots and talked to them about their life and what was going on, their children, their wives, what was it like to be here, and just getting a sense of who they are as people. They're great people, just amazing people. They were really open. When I started the interviews, there was a Pentagon woman sitting with me, overseeing the interviews. And I just stepped out after the first one, said, Pete, this doesn't work. They're not going to talk to me with her sitting there. And they left. They said, okay. And they didn't say anything. Nobody said anything that was negative. It was just, now without somebody listening in, they can just open up about their lives in a way they wouldn't. And then it was time to get up in the air. But I did have to go through training. They don't just put you in a plane and fly like they fly me. I had to go through training, and that was great because they talked about things. I had to go through, how to get out of a helicopter. If a helicopter goes down, how do you exit? So they have a helicopter, a mock-up, and it's over a pool, and they dump you in the water, and then you have to, yes, as the water's coming down, you have to go out in slow order. So these sort of things, going through that and getting a feeling of it. And one of the things that was critical at that moment was, because I didn't want to do the same old thing. I don't want to open the movie with somebody dying. I don't want to, because I saw flight movies. So how do we make this unique? And one of the things I learned in the training before I flying was, they said, you got to be careful. If you eject, there's debris possibly above you that's very deadly. And I wrote that down and said, now I don't expect that. That's interesting. We'll come back to that later, that sort of thing. So taking notes of looking for things that jump out. In the dogfighting, I went up with two planes, the two of us, and we did dogfighting, high-speed dogfighting. We pulled about 5-6 Gs and all that sort of stuff, and they grunt to keep the blood flowing up in my brain. And one of the things the things that I was most shocked about when I came down from my ride was these guys are acrobatic. They're like athletes. They're not. It's not just about pilots. They're pilots flying under G forces. And so for writers, you have to find a way in. You just can't. Okay, so what's our experience? Well, I've never done that daily, but Jim and I were both athletes. So to us, internally we said this is a sports movie, and these are athletes, and they're training for the big game, and athletes, and so we could then help us to sort of understand the physical nature of it. And that's the change with flying, because if I hadn't gone up flying, we would write something, it would, but this was about G-force pulling all this stuff, and how and they did great things with, come out of a G-force, they blinked Tom blinked his eyes to, make sure he was, still conscious, that sort of stuff. Well, like I said, the hardest thing is, what's this movie about? Who's it about? And that's the hardest thing is, and I think the most important is the character, because the story is about not what happens, but what happens to who. Who is it that all these events happen to, and why is important? What was really tough for me is I'm down there, and as a writer, I learned very quickly, you write the conflict. So what's the conflict? Okay, what's the conflict in this story? And besides just going to battle, which is the obvious thing, you're going to have a fight somewhere. Although we did agree, is one of the things I said to Don and Jerry is, this has got to end with a real battle. I can't have a school movie that doesn't have a real battle. They all agree, yes, we have a real battle at the end. So being down there, I was looking for the conflict, and all of the guys are great. They get along, they work together, it's all teamwork. And I'm going, damn, man, what is this? And I'm on the flight deck, and they were a row of like 10 F-14s, and they're just gorgeous. I'm looking at them, I go, well, what if one guy doesn't get along? What if one guy just goes his own way? And, what if that? And that's the conflict. He bumps against the system. So I went, okay, well, that's the conflict. He is his own route, and he bumps against everything that I'm seeing that works, but this is the conflict. And so then we had to come up with the character, who he is, and the story, and all this other sort of stuff but that gave me the central conflict of what this story is going to be about. I very much didn't want to do a plot movie. I wanted to do it more of this character relationships. That was sort of what the movies were in the early 80s. And so I was just trying to stay on with that. And then when we were writing it, we came up with our own call signs, because I didn't want to use anybody's call sign that I interviewed, because I was actually worried about legal things. It's like, oh, you wrote my story, and that, So I said, look, we'll make up our own call signs. And I came up with Maverick. That's who he is. He's a Maverick. And Jim came up with Goose, and we different ones, and Viper. Viper is actually an homage to Pete Pettigrew, because that was Pete's actual call sign. So that's the one we did use. The Iceman, yes, Iceman. I came up with Iceman because that's who he was. So it's you've got to have opposites. So if you have Maverick, and he's going to be emotional, and he's going to be a little out of control, you got a guy who's not. He's Iceman. And there was a basketball player whose nickname was Iceman. I always loved that. I stayed with me, and I said, "Ooh, we'll call him the Iceman." Well, I will take credit for this. I was a big fan of Tom Cruise, and so when we were writing it, I said, "Jim, write it for Tom Cruise. Just write it for him, because to me, he's a young American. He would fit this fighter pilot mode so well." A big fan. And so when I gave it to Jerry Bruckheimer, I said, Jerry, and actually it was one of these things where we were writing Dick Tracy at that time. We'd pull away, because it was going back and forth, and that was part of, especially at that time, what was happening. So I met Jerry late, like with Saturday night at like 10 o'clock at the big gates of Bel Air to give him the script. I mean, it sort of feels like a spy movie. But when I handed it to him, I said, Jerry, when you read this, think Tom Cruise. And they read it next day or two, said, yep, Tom Cruise, that's it. And so they went after Tom. And first he said no. That's how I understand the story. And then they got him a jet ride up in Point Mugu. And Tom pulls up there. And at that point, he had long hair, and he drove up on a motorcycle, and these pilots are going, well, look at this guy. What is this Hollywood guy? So they took him up, and they do what they like to do, which is like to, throw him around and make him throw up. And Tom threw up all day, but he came down, and he said, I love it. I want to make it. Let's do it. And that was it. And that was, that's how it happened.